Hello, welcome to Behind the Baton number 11. Today we're kind of towards the end of summer, hoping everyone's had a great summer. And we're going to deal a little bit with auditions, deal with some recent articles in the New York Times. And I'm going to start with a little discussion of something that was kind of startling to me this summer at the Eastern Music Festival. Over a period of 3 days, we did music by, and I'll go through the list here: Paul Hindemith, the German composer; Rachmaninoff; Stravinsky, the Russian composer; Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco, the Italian composer; Ernst Bloch, the Swiss composer; and Hae-Kyung Lee, a premier of a South Korean composer. So if I were to ask you what was the thing that was in common among all these composers, the one element that was in common is that they're all Americans. And that's an interesting fact, I think, because what I find, when I read biographies of composers, if they emigrate to England or to France or to Germany from some other place, they become a Russian-German composer or a Russian-Italian composer or a French-British composer or something like that. And in the case of every one of these composers, Hindemith, born in Frankfurt, German composer, came to the United States, became an American citizen. Rachmaninoff became an American citizen, Stravinsky did. Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco, who, if you read about him, they will say he's an Italian composer, actually spent a great deal of time writing films in California. He wrote over 200 films. We did his first guitar concerto, a wonderful piece, a wonderful composer. Ernst Bloch, of course, sometimes is referred to as an American, but he was Swiss born. And Hae-Kyung Lee, wonderful composer who teaches at Denison University, was born in South Korea, came to the United States, studied here, and became an American citizen as well. So in a way, I guess it's a new passion of mine that we, all of us who know music, and all of you who write about music, should acknowledge the fact that Hindemith was a German-American composer. Yes, at the end of his life, he went back to Switzerland. But it's the same with Korngold. He wasn't being played these days, but there's so many of these great composers. So that's my little tidbit of today. And now I'm going to move on to some recent articles in the New York Times. Again, the New York Times is the one publication of a daily newspaper that really delves into subjects that are interesting in our musical world, and we're very grateful for the space they give, for the fact that there's an arts section in that paper every day. I always make an interesting note that there is not a sports section every day, but there's an arts section every day, so I'm very pleased about that. A wonderful writer for the Times named Zachary Wolf did a story about compensation of music directors. Interesting subject, and he dealt with it, I thought, very beautifully, and opened it, I think, to a lot more discussion. It's a big issue when you think about compensation in general for nonprofits. We who work in the nonprofit sector deserve to be properly paid. How much is that? Should a great conductor be paid like a great sports figure? Of course, that will never happen. But let's say, I'm trying to think of a great business. Well, that won't happen either. But there is some level of compensation. So if the concertmaster of a great orchestra, how much should that person be paid? We in the nonprofit world are always asking for donations from individuals, from corporations, from foundations, from government sources. If we're lucky, 50% of our expenses are covered by ticket sales. I know when I was in Seattle, we were about 50%. But a lot of orchestras are only getting 30 or 35% from ticket sales. It could mean three things. They play in a small hall, possible. The ticket prices are not terribly high, which is also possible. Or they don't sell very many tickets, which is also possible. You have those three elements that could happen. But in fact, this subject needs a lot of thought. My basic idea is, for music directors, that it is the responsibility of the boards of directors to designate what that compensation level should be. If someone asks me to be a music director and I say, yes, I'm happy to do the job, but you have to pay me $1 million, and the board of directors says, well, we can't afford $1 million, but we could pay you $500,000, still large numbers. If I say yes, then that's fine. If I say no, then they'll get someone else, which is the way the world works. And there is no shortage of wonderful conductors. There are many, and there are many positions. So if a conductor says that she or he wants $2 million, if the board of directors feels that that person is worth it, that they can afford it, it's their decision to be made. It's not for us looking in from the outside to say what they should be paying their top executive, their top artistic person, their concert master, or their first oboe. I mean, these are issues that that they need to deal with. I've been involved with lots of boards of directors, both as a board member and of course as a music director, and everyone I've ever been involved with cares deeply about the budget. They care about being fair, but they also care about not wasting any money, and they quite frankly look at nickels and dimes. If they feel that they can afford a huge salary for the concert master because this person is so valuable and so important, as I say, God bless them and God bless her or him for commanding that. So that's my little comment about Zach Wolf's wonderful article. Then Corinna Fosecco-Walheim wrote a very thought-provoking piece about the Bard Music Festival where Leon Bosting was focusing on Rimsky-Korsakov. And I think what I got from her article was a new or renewed respect for this great composer. It's something that I found a number of years ago because Klaus Heyman at Naxos Records asked me to record a lot of Rimsky-Korsakov. So I recorded most, I'm not sure all, but most of the opera suites that he made, the famous pieces, Capriccio Espagnol, Scheherazade, Russian Easter, and I recorded his first and third symphonies. And I found a great composer there. Not only was Scheherazade, of course, wonderful, and Russian Easter, but these other works, in some ways, even more wonderful. Scheherazade suffers a little bit from a lot of repetition, and that's one of the reasons why it's so famous, because people recognize it, they hear the tune, they love the tune, and it comes back often in different ways. It's slow, it comes back fast, it comes back as a violin solo or as a trombone solo. I mean, he was a master orchestrator, but he was also a great composer. Now, was he on the level of Brahms or Beethoven? In my estimation, no. But for me, a wonderful composer, and you don't want to have a concert made up of only steak. You want to have a little appetizer, you want to have a little dessert, you want to have something. You may decide to have fish that meal. So it's not only Brahms and Beethoven that resonate with us and our audiences. So that's my little comment about Corinna's excellent article about Rimsky-Korsakov. Now, I'm going to deal with a subject that we really hadn't discussed so far. And I'm going to do this over a period of a number of these shows and talk about auditions. There are lots of kinds of auditions. There are auditions in a competition. There are auditions to get an orchestral position. There's whether you're a conductor or a player. There could be an audition which can be called an interview. Sometimes interviews go with the audition. Let's first talk about an instrumental audition. So what I'd like to do over these next months of this program is I'm going to talk about individual instruments and what one looks for and what pieces actually might be interesting. And my wife Jody, when I told her I was thinking about doing this and I thought I would do it for the violin today, she said, well, actually, why don't you just do it for the trumpet? Since that was your instrument, wouldn't that be the most fun? And then tell about your experience of auditioning. I have two fun experiences to talk about. One was when I auditioned for Leopold Stokowski when I got in the American Symphony, and the other was when I auditioned for Pierre Boulez when I became a member of the New York Philharmonic. The Stokowski audition was just charming. I went to Juilliard, I auditioned for the orchestra there and didn't get in. And as a freshman, which was very upsetting to me, so a friend said, why don't you go audition for Stokowski? He has this young orchestra, he likes young people, and maybe you can get in. So I went to his apartment, I found his number, I called him, I went to his apartment on Fifth Avenue, and lo and behold, there was the great Leopold Stokowski. He had a book about this thick, with little tabs, violin, viola, cello, bass, flute, and then he turned to the trumpet page. And on the trumpet page were all handwritten excerpts, Parsifal. I remember was one, Scheherazade was one, and and he just had me play all of these excerpts, and I played them all very well. I mean, I didn't know what he was going to ask me, but I certainly knew all of these pieces. And then he gave me a little lecture about how I should play the piano and how I should play soft, both which I thought I could do pretty well, but he really didn't want to hear me play the piano or hear me play soft, and I got in. And so instead of playing at the orchestra at Juilliard, I played on the stage at Carnegie Hall with Leopold Stokowski, and they actually paid me to sit there. I mean, that was, what an experience. The next one, I mean, it's more involved than that, but that's the basic idea. The next one was the New York Philharmonic one. So this was 1971, and it may have been, or may have been early 72. And in those days, for principal players, it was a principal trumpet opening, the conductor could pick people. You didn't have to have auditions. So, for example, when John Woomer, the great solo flute of the New York Philharmonic, retired, Bernstein was the music director, they invited the great flutist Julius Baker to become the first flute. He didn't audition, they just invited him. He said yes, and then he became the first flute for many years after that. In the case of the trumpet, Boulez wanted to hear 10 of the best players around. And the personnel manager then was a horn player, a former horn player named Jimmy Chambers, who I knew from my days as a student, and I worked with him a lot as his assistant in his orchestral rep class. Then I took over his class. And so he invited the 9 maybe most famous, most distinguished principal trumpets around the country to audition. And he was able to talk Boulez, the administration, into letting me play as well. He came to me and he said, "We're doing private auditions, no one's going to know who's playing, and you can't know, I will not tell you anyone else who's playing, but I would love it if you would take this audition." I just was so excited because my whole life I dreamed about playing first trumpet in the New York Philharmonic, taking my teacher's place, William Vacchiano, who is now retiring. So I asked the obvious question, which any of you would ask, what repertoire? And Chambers said, everything. I said, oh, okay, everything. So, everything. So in preparing for this, I had to, we have books, we all have books, excerpt books, and I prepared all the normal excerpts. So I knew them all. I mean, I knew them all when I was 15, but here I was 24, and I prepared them yet again. And interestingly, and it's an important lesson, I think, I started practicing them in large spaces. I went to the parish house of a friend's father's church. So he was a minister, Gilbert Hemsley, and very close family friend, and they had a big parish house where they did whatever kind of events they did, and I said, can I come there and practice? So every day I go to the parish house, quite large, and practice. Why? Because my audition was going to be in Philharmonic Hall, which was a large concert hall. And if I'm playing in a small room all the time, my dynamic range will be for that room. I won't play as loud as I need to in a big hall to fill the hall, or even if I'm playing really softly, you still have to fill the hall. So I practiced in this space. When I arrived at the audition, Boulez just kept putting one piece out. Well, no, Boulez was in the hall. He was the only person there, and Mr. Chambers would put one piece after another up. So I play the piece, he'd take that piece, next piece, and I'd play, and this went on for an hour. One of the pieces, and of course a lot of the pieces I knew, but some of the pieces I didn't know, so I was reading, but we can do that. I mean, who can't? If you're a good musician, you can read. One of them was an early opus of Anton von Webern, and he corrected my intonation on a note, and I thought he was wrong. What did I know? But he said it's too sharp, so I fixed it. About 15 minutes later, he has me go back to the same excerpt to see if I could replicate the fix, which of course I could, because I was prepared for that kind of thing. As soon as I got home, by the way, I checked my tuner, and he was right, I was wrong. I've been playing that note sharp all my life. What did I know? Shows you how much you can learn from a conductor, spoken as a conductor. So after an hour of playing, I mean, I was in a big hall. I mean, it started out where I remember playing the Haydn trumpet concerto. I played the first movement. No, I played the exposition of the first movement, which is what's typical at an audition. You play that, and I stopped. And Boulez said, please continue. So I get up to the cadenza and I stop. He said, let me hear the cadenza. I played the cadenza. Then I played the second movement. Then I played the whole third movement. So by then, only 15 minutes had gone by, but I was playing pretty loud because I had to fill this big hall on a concerto without any real rests. You just keep playing. So, and then 45 minutes more go by, and so an hour's gone by, and I was able to play, relatively perfectly. Everything was fine. And then he said to me, okay, we want to do the second Brandenburg Concerto. Now, for those of you who know this piece, it's very high for the trumpet, very hard, but it's a piece I'd played many times. It's, one of my specialties, if there was such a thing. But I was tired, and this is very hard, and very high. So I figured I could do the last movement. That wasn't so taxing. So I said, Maestro, could I do the last movement? He said, no, start from the beginning. So I start at the beginning. And the beginning is just little arpeggios, nothing hard. And then you get to the first hard spot, and it went fine. And the second hard spot went fine. And I knew I couldn't do any more. I stopped and I said, Maestro, I'm too tired. After all the playing, I can't really carry. I didn't stop after I screwed up. Just so honest, I waited. I knew it was going to come. So then he said, why don't you rest for a little while? Can you imagine? I'm sitting on the stage by myself with Jimmy Chambers and Boulez in the audience, resting. How long can you sit there? I figured if I had maybe rested for a half an hour, I could do it. So I rested for 30 seconds. That seemed like an eternity. And I said, Maestro, could I do the last movement? Being a smart kid. He said, no, start from the beginning again. So I start from the beginning again. And I get to the same place I got to the time before. I still hadn't made any mistakes. And I said, I really can't, I just can't do this now. I'll come back tonight, I'll come back tomorrow, anytime I can play this piece, but I really, after this, the long audition, I really can't do it. And he said, oh, that's fine. And I left. And so I said to Chambers, Jimmy, I can play this piece. I mean, I'll come back tonight. I'll come back. I mean, I'll play it 4 or 5 times if you want. I just can't do it right now. He said, don't worry about it. He'll understand, not a problem. And then a week or so went by and he called me and told me I got the job. I guess the interesting part of that is there was no list. Nowadays, for orchestral passage, we get lists. It used to be, you do the Brahms second, the Bruckner seventh, Rhapsody Espagnole, La Mer, Mathis de Mahler, whatever it is, Mahler 5, whatever the list is, you get the list and you prepare it. Well, then the committees and the orchestras felt this was too difficult and that you should say be more specific. So then all of us and the conductors changed. Okay, we'll do Brahms second first movement, we'll do Mahler fifth last movement, we'll do the Bruckner seventh first one, whatever we said. And then they decided that was still too much, and we had to narrow it down even more. So we would say Brahms first, Brahms second, first movement, bar 24 through bar 46, to make it easy for everyone to prepare. A little different from my experience, but I thought that was fine. What I always tried to do when I made the lists, and I'll go through some lists at some point, is I wanted to try to hit everything that needed to be discussed. So you want to make sure that there's some high notes and that there's some low notes. There's some loud passages, there's some soft passages. There are technical passages that are, let's say if you're a trumpet player, finger, or violinist, left hand ones, or if you're a wind brass player, ones that require tonguing. Certainly there are interpretive things that are very important. Concerto is very important. So they usually nowadays will say play a movement of a Mozart concerto or a movement of a Brahms concerto, or designate a solo piece. My advice always is to play traditional solo repertoire, but try to avoid Baroque music. Classical music's even a little dangerous, but not so much. Everyone has opinions about Baroque music. If you play Bach, Some people think you shouldn't use vibrato. Some people think it's okay to use vibrato. Some people think the tempo should be generally fast. Some think the tempo should be generally slow. There, too many people have too many ideas. Better to avoid the problem. Don't play Bach if you can avoid it. You play the traditional piece, and usually you're asked to do the exposition. But I remember when we were auditioning in Seattle for the associate concertmaster position, and Brahms' Violin Concerto First Movement was the solo piece, among others to choose from. But our concertmaster at the time always wanted the recapitulation. He was a little, he really wanted to just throw a little wrench into the works. Instead of playing the beginning, he wanted the recapitulation. Well, the players who were experienced, it wasn't a problem. Some of them who weren't so experienced had a little difficulty because they didn't expect it. As a player, what I think you want to do is you want to first show you have a musical personality. So you want to make music. You want to do something that is expressive. You want to make sure that at some point during the audition you play very loud and very soft. You pick moderate tempos. Don't go crazy with playing things too fast or go crazy playing things too slow. You know the excerpts, if they're going to ask you to do the Mendelssohn Scherzo, you know that it's because they want to hear how soft and short you can play. So play really soft and play really short. When I used to give auditions, I used to ask questions like, oh, would you do it some way, faster, slower, louder, softer, on the string, off the string, just anything to see if there was any flexibility in the player. Remember, if conductors, the committees are allowed to ask, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. If they're allowed to ask, they're not being critical. They're not saying, oh, would you do it faster, please, because they thought you were too slow. They just want to see if you could do it. Or if they say, would you try it starting down bow rather than up bow, it wasn't because they didn't like the up bow, it's because they wanted to see if at the rehearsal the conductor said, no, let's do it down bow, to see if you're what we call an audition player can only play everything one way. So it's really important to know what the committee are looking for, to try to make music, to try to make a beautiful sound, and you have to know the repertoire. Now, I always gave sight reading. Most auditions, they say sight reading. I gave traditional repertoire for sight reading, usually Brahms. Could be almost anything. But I always wanted players that had some musical literacy. I wasn't looking for audition players who could play those 12 bars that I designated very clearly, or we designated 24 bars. I wanted to see, do you know how the Brahms third goes? Are you committed to orchestral music and your knowledge? It's very valuable. To be a great orchestral player, you have to love great orchestral music. You have to invest in it as an individual. And then you can have a happy life as a violinist. If you're in the first violin section and there's 16 first violins, you're playing the same part as everyone else. It can be a little frustrating unless you're playing that great melody in the Brahms symphony and just are so lucky to be there, to be able to enjoy and perform this and get paid for it. I mean, you know, it's a remarkable world that we're in. And we talk about compensation. I'm going to just take a little tangent with this because as orchestral players, you also have compensation issues. Now, most orchestral orchestras have scale, so there's a number that you cannot be paid less than. It doesn't mean you have to be paid that number. You can ask for more. You can get it or you can not get it. If you're a solo player, asking for more is a smart idea. Knowing what other solo players are getting in other orchestras is also a valuable idea. Easy to find. There's a website where you can find all nonprofits, top salaries. You get an idea of what people get paid. So if you come in too low, very hard to get higher because all raises are done usually by percentages. Oh, we're going to give you a 5% raise. Well, nowadays it's pretty good. But if you're starting really low, 5% isn't going to get you very far. So it's good to be knowledgeable. If you get the first flute in Detroit, and you should know what the first flute in St. Louis is getting, what the first flute in San Francisco is getting, what the first flute in Houston's getting, in Seattle or Indianapolis. So you get a feeling for what the market will bear according to the budget of the orchestra. See, all these these things, I mean, these aren't artistic things, but they do affect you and they affect your life, and sometimes they can grate on you. We all know about the problem in Boston between the first flute and the management about the fact that she feels that she's not being compensated properly. This is upsetting to she's a great flutist, a great artist, and she's upset by that. And as an orchestra, you don't want to have your players upset. On the other hand, you don't want to be upset, so you have to set yourself up so that you have the possibility of success on every level. Let me see if there's one more subject before we close today that I'd like to talk to you about, and it's one that I find to be something that we all need to be advocates for. We need to be advocates for music appreciation. Many people are lucky who are college teachers, even high school teachers, but especially college teachers, that they get to teach a music appreciation class, which means you get people coming into the class, many of whom do not know classical music, or if they like it, they may not have any knowledge about it, and you're going to impart to them great love of this great art form. So I feel in some ways I do it with all the musically speaking CDs and concerts I've done, with all the educational stuff we do with the All-Star Orchestra. It's in a sense music appreciation, because we're looking into these great works with a little more depth. But there is another one of my philosophical ideas that many of you will agree with, and probably an equal number won't agree with. I think music appreciation basically should be taught between the Baroque period and the traditional 20th century, traditional 21st century. When you go back to discussing the Gregorian chant, as wonderful and as interesting that can be historically, if you do more than one session on it and you start getting into plainsong and getting into all of the medieval music, it can be really difficult because it's not easily digestible. The same thing can be said about the avant-garde. You're dealing with the music of Stockhausen or the music of even someone like Boulez, who people may not consider avant-garde. Very hard to digest, especially for a non-music person. That doesn't mean that contemporary music can't be digested. It certainly can. It depends on many elements. But anyway, my feeling is that the period from Gabrieli moving towards Bach and then the 20th century is the area that we need to focus on. If you focus too much on medieval music, on Gregorian chant and things like that, or too much on the avant-garde, you will really, I think, hurt the class. Doesn't mean you shouldn't touch upon it at all. Of course you should. But I think when you look at most music appreciation books, when they get to the 20th century, they do one chapter on American music, and then they do one chapter on Russian music, and Prokofiev, Shostakovich. American is Schumann, Copeland, Barber, and so forth. And then they do a chapter on Xenakis, and a chapter on Stockhausen, and a chapter on Varese, and a chapter. And I'm not saying these are not important composers to study, but I think the proportion needs to go the other way. So now you've gotten a whole bunch of my prejudices today. I hope you don't take offense at them, but they're certainly not to be offensive. But I think all of this stuff, all of these things we need to think about. We need to think about as teachers, we need to think about as audience members. Remember that as performers, as musicians, the most important thing besides the music itself is the audience. And we really need to focus on them and making sure that our great art form is as understood as possible. We need to educate, and we need to have a large and enthusiastic audience. And all of you that follow my Facebook Live here and delayed, I know are part of that audience, and I care about you. And the things that I'm talking about, I hope you talk about. If people don't talk about what we're thinking, whether it's about compensation or about repertoire, then we become insignificant. We need to be talked about. You go to a concert. Sometimes used to be after the concert, no one talked about the music. Well, I don't do that. I make sure we all talk about the music because that's what's important, and the performance. Yes, we become critics. Oh, did you like this? You did all of that. But it's important that a dialogue. And that's why reading about it and thinking about it, that's why these articles I mentioned in the New York Times are so valuable because they're thought-provoking articles. They're not lectures about Rimsky-Korsakov or lectures about compensation. They are the beginning of a discussion that hopefully you'll have around a dinner table or in a cocktail lounge, rather than talking about the batting average of the baseball players. Anyway, that's the end of number 11. I'll see you in a few weeks, and I hope you have a great Labor Day holiday. Thanks.